Get out! Now!
Oh, what are you doing? Ah, no, stop! Help! Help me, please!
What happened? Yes, she's down. Suburbia Drive. Hurry! Ma'am, stay with me. Help is coming.
She was 8 months pregnant. The car was still moving. And her husband, the man who had promised before God and family to love and protect her, reached across her body, unclipped her seatbelt, and shoved her out the door. She hit the pavement at 30 miles an hour. Her hands scraped the asphalt. Her pregnant belly, carrying their son, a baby boy she had already named, took the impact of the fall. She rolled. She screamed. And the car? It didn't stop. He didn't stop. He accelerated and disappeared around the corner like she was nothing. Like she was garbage he had finally found the nerve to throw out. She lay on that road, bleeding, gasping, holding her stomach with both hands, praying that her baby was still alive inside her. And then, in a moment that seems almost too extraordinary to be real, a black SUV came around the bend and screeched to a halt just feet from where she lay. The man who stepped out of that car? He wasn't just any good Samaritan. He was one of the wealthiest men in America. And what he did next didn't just save her life. It changed it entirely. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The first time Marcus raised his hand to her, they had been married for 11 months. He apologized. He cried. He brought flowers. He said it would never happen again. It happened again. Over the next 4 years, Darlene lived a life that she kept meticulously hidden from the outside world. She wore long sleeves when she needed to. She made excuses for bruises. She got very good at laughing at parties, at family dinners, at performing a version of fine so convincingly that almost nobody questioned it. Almost nobody. Keisha suspected. Her mother suspected. But Darlene had built such thick, protective walls around her reality that every time someone tried to get close to the truth, she pushed them back. Because to admit what was happening would mean dismantling the life she had worked so hard to build. It would mean admitting that the man she had chosen, in front of everyone, was not who she thought he was. And then, at 34, Darlene found out she was pregnant. She told Marcus on a Tuesday evening, standing in the kitchen, holding the positive test with shaking hands. She was terrified of his reaction. But to her astonishment, to her genuine, tearful relief, Marcus seemed transformed. He held her. He wept. He said this baby was going to change everything. He said this was the sign he had been waiting for. He promised, again, that the man who had hurt her was gone. For 3 months, she almost believed him. But old patterns have roots that run deeper than promises. And by the 5th month of her pregnancy, Marcus had relapsed into the person he had always been underneath the charm and the tears and the flowers. Only this time, with a growing belly in the way, his cruelty found new expressions, new cruelties, new ways of making her feel small, trapped, and completely alone. By the 8th month, Darlene had made a decision. She was leaving. She had called Keisha. She had a bag packed, hidden in the back of the closet, behind winter coats, with her documents, some cash, and clothes for the baby. She had a plan. She just needed the right moment. She never got it. The argument started over something small. It always did. A phone call Darlene had taken in the other room. Marcus wanted to know who it was. Darlene told him it was Keisha. Marcus didn't believe her. And what began as questions escalated, as it always did, into accusations, into shouting, into the kind of controlled fury that Darlene had learned to fear more than the loud explosions. Because the quiet rage was the most dangerous kind with Marcus. The quiet rage was when he made decisions. He told her to get in the car. She didn't want to get in the car. He told her again. Something in his voice, something she had spent 4 years learning to read the way a sailor reads weather, told her that refusing was the worst option. So she got in the car. 8 months pregnant, wearing a yellow maternity top and jeans, her hospital bag still hidden in the closet at home. He drove in silence for 11 minutes. He turned onto a road she didn't immediately recognize. Semi-industrial. Light traffic. And then he spoke. He told her he knew she was planning to leave. He told her he had found the bag. He told her, in that quiet, cold voice, that she was not taking his son anywhere. She tried to speak. She tried to explain, to de-escalate, to do what she had spent years doing. Manage his emotions before they turned physical. She didn't get the chance. His hand came across the center console. He grabbed the seatbelt strap, pulled it away from her body, and before she could process what was happening, he leaned across her and pushed open the passenger door. Then he shoved her. She didn't fly out. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal and sudden and ugly. Her body lurching sideways, her hands grabbing for anything, finding nothing, and then the pavement coming up to meet her with a violence that knocked every thought out of her head. The car kept moving. She lay on the road, stunned into a silence that lasted only seconds before the pain hit. The burning of her palms, the screaming ache in her left hip and elbow, and beneath all of it, the one fear that eclipsed everything else, her baby. She pressed both hands flat against her belly. "Please," she said out loud. She heard a car. She tried to sit up and couldn't. The sound of tires braking, a door opening, and then footsteps, fast footsteps, coming toward her. "Don't move. I'm calling 911 right now. Don't try to move. You're okay. I've got you." The voice was a man's. Calm, authoritative, the kind of voice that, even in the worst moment of your life, makes you feel like maybe everything is not completely lost. She looked up. She didn't recognize him in that moment. She was in too much pain, too much shock. All she saw was a tall man in an expensive dark coat, kneeling on the asphalt beside her, his phone already at his ear, his eyes locked onto hers. "What's your name?" he asked. "Darlene," she said. "Darlene, I'm right here. The ambulance is coming. Your baby is going to be okay. I'm not leaving." He did not leave. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Darlene was assessed on the scene. Severe road rash on both palms and her left forearm, a fractured left elbow, bruised hip, and early signs of contractions that the paramedics took very seriously given she was 32 weeks along, not full term, but within the survivable zone. They loaded her carefully, and the billionaire who had places to be and a schedule that cost thousands of dollars per hour climbed into that ambulance with her. The paramedic hesitated. "Sir, are you family?" He looked at Darlene. She said, "He's with me." And that was enough. At the hospital, he stayed in the waiting room while doctors assessed Darlene and monitored the baby. He called his personal assistant and canceled every obligation he had for the rest of the day. He called someone else, his private attorney, and had a 20-minute conversation that would, within 48 hours, set in motion a series of legal actions that Marcus never saw coming. When the doctor came out to report that the baby's heartbeat was strong and stable, that Darlene would need surgery on her elbow, but was otherwise going to recover, this man, who did not know Darlene, who had no connection to her, who had simply been on the wrong road at the right moment, sat down in a hospital chair and put his face in his hands. A nurse who witnessed it said, later, that it looked like relief. Deep, personal, almost desperate relief. Like a man who had been given back something he thought he had lost. Nobody fully understood that reaction until later. Robert grew up in Philadelphia. Not wealthy Philadelphia, working Philadelphia. His father was a mechanic. His mother was a bookkeeper. They lived in a row house and drove a used car, and his mother packed his lunch every day in a brown paper bag with his name written on it in blue marker. He described his early childhood as ordinary in the best possible way. He remembered his parents dancing in the kitchen to the radio. He remembered his mother's laugh. When Robert was 9 years old, his father began drinking heavily. By the time Robert was 11, the dancing in the kitchen had been replaced by a different kind of noise entirely. He was 12 years old the first time he watched his father hurt his mother badly enough that she could not hide it. He remembered standing in the hallway in his pajamas, frozen, not understanding why his body would not move, why he could not make himself go in and stop it. He remembered his mother catching his eye over his father's shoulder. And he remembered, this is the part that stayed with him for 50 years, that she shook her head. A tiny, barely perceptible shake, telling him, "Stay back. I'll handle it. Don't make it worse." She handled it. She always handled it. Until the night she couldn't. Robert was 14 when his mother was taken to the hospital for the last time. She survived. But the damage, to her body, to something fundamental and irreplaceable inside her, was lasting. His father went to prison. His mother never fully came back to herself in the ways that mattered most. Robert raised himself, largely. He was brilliant and driven and ferociously ambitious in the specific way that children who have witnessed helplessness become. They build power because powerlessness left a wound that never healed. He built a company, then another. He gave money, quietly, consistently, to organizations that helped women in abusive situations. But he rarely talked about why. Until Darlene. In that ambulance, while the paramedics worked, Darlene had looked at him, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and refused to leave, and asked, "Why are you still here?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because a long time ago, I couldn't be there for someone who needed me, and I swore I wouldn't let that happen again if I ever had the chance." While Darlene was in that hospital, while Robert was in that waiting room, Marcus was still out there, and he had no idea what was coming. Within 6 hours of Darlene's admission to the hospital, Marcus was located by police at his brother's apartment 12 miles away. The charge was aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, a vehicle, against a pregnant woman. Marcus, when apprehended, initially told officers that Darlene had jumped out of the car during an argument, that she had been acting erratic, that he had been scared for his own safety. What Marcus did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that in that hospital waiting room, Robert had made several phone calls beyond just 911 and his personal attorney. He had called the director of a foundation he partially funded, a foundation specifically dedicated to legal advocacy for survivors of domestic violence. By the time Darlene was out of surgery, a victim's advocate from that foundation was already at the hospital, sitting quietly in the hallway, waiting to be needed. He had also called someone with connections to the prosecutor's office, not to interfere with the case, but to make sure it was being treated with the full seriousness it deserved. He returned to the hospital the following morning to check on Darlene. He brought food, not flowers, not a card, but actual food, a meal from a Haitian restaurant nearby because Darlene had told a nurse she was of Haitian descent and hadn't eaten since before the incident. It was a detail that required listening closely to remember. Robert had listened closely. He sat with Darlene for 40 minutes. He didn't do most of the talking. He mostly listened while she told him things she hadn't been able to say out loud to anyone. About Marcus, about the years, about the bag in the closet she'd packed and never gotten to use, about how she was terrified that having a baby in a hospital bed, without the birth she had planned, without the person she had once thought would be beside her, meant she had somehow already failed her son. Robert told her the fact that you and that baby are alive right now is not a failure. It is the beginning. 3 days after the incident, Darlene went into labor. Her body, under the stress of the trauma and the surgery, had decided it was time. The doctors were prepared. She was 33 weeks. Early, but within a range they could work with. The labor was long. It was hard. It was the kind of labor that asks everything of you even under perfect circumstances, and Darlene's circumstances were about as far from perfect as a woman could get. Her elbow was in a surgical splint. She had road rash still healing on her palms. She had not slept more than fragments since the incident. And the man who had promised to be in that delivery room with her, the man whose name was on the birth certificate she had already filled out, was in a county jail cell. Keisha was there. She had arrived within hours of learning what happened, driven through the night from 3 states away, walked into that hospital room, looked at Darlene, and said nothing. Just pulled a chair up to the bed and took her hand. Sometimes the oldest friends are the ones who know that words are not the point. Darlene's mother was there too, by the second day. A small, fierce woman in her late 60s who had driven herself to the airport, purchased a last-minute ticket, and arrived at the hospital with a tin of homemade cookies, and an expression that suggested she was personally holding the universe responsible for what had happened to her daughter. The baby was born just after 4 a.m. on a Thursday. He weighed 5 pounds, 4 ounces. He had a full head of dark hair and his mother's wide, serious eyes and his grandmother's stubborn chin, and when they placed him on Darlene's chest, she made a sound. Not a cry exactly, not a laugh, but something that lived in the space between them. Something that sounded like surviving. She named him Samuel. Robert was not in the hospital that morning, but he had left a card with a nurse he had come to know over the previous days. The nurse brought it to Darlene that first afternoon, while Samuel slept on her chest. Now, while Darlene was recovering, while Samuel was growing stronger in the NICU, gaining the ounces he needed, learning to breathe on his own, wrapping his impossibly small fingers around his mother's thumb, Marcus was doing what controlling men who have lost control always do. He was lawyering up. From his jail cell, awaiting trial on aggravated assault charges, Marcus filed for full custody of Samuel, the man who had pushed his 8-month pregnant wife from a moving vehicle, who was currently in jail awaiting trial for that act, filed a motion asserting that he should have primary custody of the son he had nearly killed before birth. His legal argument was calculated and cold. Darlene, he claimed, was emotionally unstable, that she had a history of erratic behavior, that her living situation, temporarily with her mother in Georgia, was unsuitable for raising an infant, that he, as the father, had rights that superseded the current circumstances. It was a power move dressed in legal language. A way of saying, "You think you escaped me? You haven't." Darlene's attorney, retained through Robert's foundation, had seen this before. This particular tactic, using the child as a leash, using custody proceedings to keep the abused partner financially drained, emotionally exhausted, and perpetually tethered to the man they tried to leave. It is devastatingly effective. It is also devastatingly common. But Darlene's attorney was not a general practice family lawyer who would need to learn the landscape. She was one of the most formidable domestic violence legal advocates in the region, with 2 decades of experience specifically in cases where abusers weaponized the family court system. She had seen this playbook before. She knew every page. The foundation filed a counter-motion that was, by all accounts, surgical. It documented the history of abuse with evidence Darlene had never had organized before. Medical records from emergency room visits over 4 years, photographs, text messages, testimony from neighbors, and a former co-worker of Darlene's who had witnessed Marcus's behavior firsthand. It documented the assault in exhaustive detail. It included the traffic camera footage, the paramedic reports, the ER physician's notes, and Robert's own witness statement. It also filed for an emergency protective order preventing Marcus from having any contact with Samuel, including by phone or third party, until the criminal trial had concluded. The motion was granted within 48 hours. Marcus, from his jail cell, was informed that his newborn son would not be reachable to him by any means. Darlene received the news while nursing Samuel in a rocking chair her mother had placed by the window in the Georgia house. Keisha was there. They read the court notice together in silence. Then Keisha said, "He thought a baby was his best weapon." Darlene looked down at Samuel. He forgot who Samuel belongs to. Over the months of the trial preparation, Robert remained in contact through the foundation. Occasionally, by practical necessity, he was present for meetings, legal strategy sessions, conversations about the case, administrative matters. He was professional, measured, careful to maintain appropriate distance. But he also listened. He listened in a way that Darlene was not accustomed to. Not performatively, not the nodding and making sounds of agreement that people do when they're waiting for their turn to speak. He listened the way you listen when what someone is saying actually matters to you, when you're filing it away, when it's changing something in you as you hear it. Darlene noticed. She noticed because she was, by that point in her life, extraordinarily attuned to the difference between men who listened and men who performed listening. Marcus had been a performer, a gifted one. She had a finely calibrated detector now for the real thing. Robert was the real thing. She also noticed that he brought food to meetings. Not catered spreads, actual food, chosen specifically. Haitian food from the restaurant she had mentioned in passing once, many months earlier, that she missed. Her favorite tea, which she had mentioned exactly once in a conversation he appeared to have barely been present for. Small things. Specific things. The kinds of things you only remember if you were truly paying attention. She didn't say anything about it. She wasn't ready to. She was still in the thick of a criminal trial, still navigating a custody battle, still doing the hard internal work of therapy, still learning, slowly and painfully, to trust her own perception of the world after years of having it systematically undermined. But she noticed, and Robert, for his part, was also navigating something he had not anticipated. He was 61 years old. He had been married once, a long time ago, a marriage that had ended not in dramatic failure, but in the quiet attrition of 2 people who had grown into different shapes. He had 3 adult children he was close to. He had, by his own admission in the one personal interview he ever gave, stopped expecting to be surprised by another person. Darlene surprised him. Not by her circumstances, not by her strength, though she was profoundly strong. What surprised him was her specificity, the particular texture of how she thought, the way she could be simultaneously deeply serious and capable of a dry, unexpected humor that surfaced at the most improbable moments. The way she talked about Samuel, not with the sentimental softness he had expected, but with a fierce, practical love that sounded like the most grounded kind of devotion. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't there. He found himself noting things to tell her the next time they spoke. He found himself, very quietly, in entirely unfamiliar territory. Neither of them acted on any of it. Not then. It was not the time. They both knew it was not the time. But something had been planted in the space between them, in the shared weight of everything they had been through together, and it was growing, quietly, without fanfare, in the way the most lasting things grow. Marcus's criminal trial began 7 months after Samuel's birth. The divorce proceedings ran concurrently. The prosecution's case was strong. Physical evidence. Medical testimony. 2 independent witnesses who had been on that road. Surveillance footage from a traffic camera 800 meters from the scene, showing Marcus's vehicle accelerating away at speed. 4 years of documented abuse, now formally organized and entered into the record. Marcus's defense attempted what defenses in cases like this typically attempt, to reframe the victim, to paint Darlene as volatile, unreliable, the architect of her own misfortune. They suggested she had opened the door herself, that she had been falling rather than pushed, that the bruising and injuries were consistent with multiple explanations. The medical examiner took apart those alternative explanations one by one, calmly and methodically, with the particular devastation of expertise applied to dishonesty. And then Robert took the stand. He testified precisely and without embellishment. He described what he saw: a pregnant woman on the pavement, a car accelerating away. He described Darlene's specific words and condition in the minutes after the incident. He was unshakable. The defense attorney, sensing that aggressive cross-examination of a man of Robert's profile carried its own risks, kept it brief. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The divorce, running simultaneously, was navigated by Darlene's legal team with quiet ruthlessness. Marcus, from his jail cell, had attempted to use the custody dispute as leverage in the divorce, agreeing to certain terms only if Darlene agreed to softer custody arrangements. His attorney communicated this position clearly. Darlene's attorney communicated back, equally clearly, that a man convicted of aggravated assault on a pregnant woman had no meaningful leverage in a family court, that the protective order would almost certainly be extended given the conviction, and that Marcus's best available option was to sign the divorce agreement as presented and preserve whatever dignity remained to him. Marcus signed. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks after the criminal sentencing, 11 years. Darlene was free. She sat in her attorney's office on the day the final paperwork was processed and stared at the document for a long time. Her attorney, a woman who had seen hundreds of these moments, said nothing. She just let it breathe. Then she picked up Samuel's jacket from the chair beside her, stood up, and walked out of the office into the afternoon light. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Robert called Darlene. Not through the foundation, not through an assistant. He called her directly, on her personal phone, at a reasonable hour on a Sunday afternoon, and when she answered he said, "I have been trying to figure out the right thing to say for approximately 4 months, and I've concluded there isn't a perfect version, so I'm just going to say it." She said, "Okay." He said, "I would like to have dinner with you. Not as a benefactor. Not in any professional capacity. As a person who would like to spend time with another person." There was a pause. Then Darlene said, "You should know that I am a 35-year-old single mother with a 1-year-old, a fractured elbow that still gives me trouble in cold weather, and approximately 7 years of therapy ahead of me." Robert said, "I know." She said, "And you're 61. He said, "I'm aware." Another pause. And then, "And Keisha, who was sitting in the next room and heard all of this through the wall, has confirmed this." Darlene laughed. Not a small polite laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere unexpected. She said, dinner would be fine. Their first dinner lasted 4 hours. Darlene, who had been doing the profound, necessary, grinding work of rebuilding herself, found in Robert something she had not expected to find for a long time. A person who knew her whole story and was not frightened by any of it. Who did not look at her with pity or with the particular uncomfortable reverence people sometimes gave to survivors. Who looked at her the same way he had on that road, steadily, with full attention, like what he saw was exactly worth seeing. They were careful. They were slow. Darlene had a therapist, boundaries, and a ferociously protective best friend named Keisha, who conducted a thorough and formal vetting process of Robert over a dinner that, by all accounts, he passed largely by listening more than he spoke. They married on a Saturday morning in early spring. Small, deliberate, exactly what they both wanted. The ceremony was held in a garden, private, belonging to a friend of Robert's with a rambling old property outside the city. 14 people. The people who had actually mattered through all of it, not the people whose names appeared on any list. When the officiant asked if they would stand by each other, in difficulty and in ease, in all the unpredictable territory ahead, Robert looked at Darlene and said, "I will," with the quiet finality of a man who has spent his life in rooms where he weighs his words carefully and means all of them. Darlene said, "I will," in a voice that did not shake. Samuel, bored with the solemnity and constitutionally incapable of being still for more than 4 minutes at a stretch, chose the exact moment of their first kiss as the right time to announce that he was hungry. The garden erupted in laughter. Darlene pulled back from Robert, looked at her son, and said, "Samuel." Honestly, Samuel looked entirely unmoved. Keisha, wiping her eyes, said it was the most perfect wedding she had ever attended. Because it was real, the whole thing was just completely real. As for Marcus, Marcus is serving his sentence. He has had no contact with Darlene or Samuel. That protective order, extended at sentencing, stands. Darlene above everything else found a path. The survival, the healing, the love that came later, the life she is building in a house with Robert, grew from that one private decision made in a closet, packing a bag, choosing herself before anyone else had the chance to. If this story stayed with you, if it moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you've carried, please don't let it sit quietly. Hit that like button right now. I know it seems like a small thing, but it tells the algorithm that stories like Darlene's deserve to be heard. Leave me a comment below. Tell me what part of this story hit you hardest. Tell me if you've known a Darlene. Tell me if you've been one. This comment section is a space for honesty, for holding each other, for saying the things we don't always get to say out loud. And if you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Thank you for watching.